And
Thank you, Rabbi Stephen. Thank you. Thank you all for being here this morning. I'm going to talk about Chief Rabbi Hertz. And I just saw that there's a plaque over there when he opened the shul in, I think, 1934. Chief Rabbi Hertz, he was born in Slovakia, which was part of the Hungarian Empire, in September 1872. And when he was 12, his parents moved to the United States and they settled in New York. And they enrolled their son, Joseph Herman, at the Jewish Theological Seminary, which was founded the year before and was an Orthodox institution and remained Orthodox for many years. He graduated from the City College of New York, and then in 1894, he graduated from the seminary with rabbinic ordination and from Columbia University with a PhD. And he took a position in Syracuse in New York State. Then 4 years later, in 1898, he was invited out to South Africa, to Johannesburg, to the Witwatersrand Hebrew congregation. Now, if you remember, in South Africa, it was a young community. Johannesburg had been a mining camp until 1886. So when Rabbi Hertz arrived, it was only 12 years old. He arrived, and a year later, the Boer War broke out in October 1899. And he was very pro-British. It was the Afrikaner Dutch settlers against the British. And he was living in the Transvaal, which was a stronghold of the Dutch. And he spoke out fiercely in favor of the British, for which he was expelled from the Transvaal and spent the rest of the war years in Cape Town. And when peace came in May 1902, he went back to his position in the Transvaal in Johannesburg. He helped, because I mentioned Johannesburg was such a young place, he helped in the foundation of what became the South African Board of Deputies, the Jewish Orphanage, the Board of Education, other organizations he helped to found. And he actually stayed in South Africa until 1911. And in that year, he returned to New York to become the rabbi of the Hungarian Orach Chaim congregation. That same year, 1911, Chief Rabbi Herman Adler passed away in London, and there were various candidates for the position. There was there was his teacher from the seminary, Rabbi Drachman. There was Rabbi Moses Hymanson, who was a member of the London Beth Din at the time. There was Rabbi Joseph Abrahams, who was in Melbourne, Australia, but he'd been born in London, and Rabbi Hertz had his name put forward as well. So they all went preaching in various synagogues and various shuls in the country. Lord Milner, who had been Governor General of the Cape at the time of the Boer War, he met Lord Rothschild, President of the United Synagogue, and he said, you know, of all the candidates, Rabbi Hertz is a very, very good candidate for you. He's very pro-British at the time of the Boer War. As soon as Lord Rothschild heard that, he said, fine, I don't need to look any further. Rabbi Hertz is going to be the candidate for chief rabbi. That's how he became the chief rabbi. And his installation was at the Great Synagogue Duke's Place in April 1913. As it turned out, he happened to be a very, very good choice for the position. The following year, August 1914, the First World War broke out. The soldiers went to the front, including many Jewish ones, for which the new Chief Rabbi Hertz wrote a book of Jewish thoughts. I'm sure you may have come across it, yes? It's no longer published, but it was a compilation by both Jewish and non-Jewish authors of the beauty of Judaism, both the ceremonial and everything else. In other words, it was to give the soldiers at the front an opportunity of showing how Jewish they were, together with a pocket siddur that they took with them throughout the fighting. In 1915, he brought together a meeting of Eastern European rabbis in England. It had never been done before. He wanted to show them that the United Synagogue and the Chief Rabbinate would aid them in whatever capacity they were able to. And as we know, in 1917, he was one of those advocates who strongly supported the British government's intention of creating a homeland for the Jewish people in Palestine. When the war ended, he decided that he would go on a tour of the British Empire, all the Jewish communities there. He started off in 1920. He was away for 11 months, and he began by sailing out to South Africa, where he visited all the communities that he knew from before. He then went to Australia and New Zealand, and from there to Canada. So he must have spoken in hundreds of communities in that 11 months away. When he returned, he was given an audience by King George V. In the 1920s, the middle 1920s, there was a decision at Geneva by the League of Nations to have a new calendar. This would be a 364-day calendar with a blank day each year. That would mean that the Shabbat, the Sabbath, would move from Saturday. Each subsequent year, it would go a day back. So the next year would be Friday, and then Thursday. And this would be catastrophe, you can imagine, for the Shabbat, because it would mean that people would not be able to keep Shabbat as they should do. He galvanized organizations and individuals to abort the whole scheme. Unfortunately, within a couple of years, the scheme was destroyed. Thank God the Shabbat was saved, but it could have been disastrous on all fronts. In 1930, he lost his wife, Rose. She was only 50, and this emotionally disturbed him for the rest of his life. In the 1930s, he decided that it was important for the shuls and for families to have an edition of the Chumash that up to then, there was no edition that would satisfy people. He decided with ministerial colleagues that he would bring out an edition, as we know, the Herz Chumash, of which he was editor-in-chief. It would have notes on every page and essays after each of the 5 books, many of which are still relevant to today. And as we know, the Herz Chumash is used to this day in many, many United Synagogue shuls and others. He also decided that there should be an annotated edition of the Singer's Prayer Book, which was called the Herz Siddur, again, with notes and with extended essays. Unfortunately, we don't find it. I think it's out of use now, but it was very popular. Always the one that very popular in its time, and again has excellent notes and essays in it. With the coming of the Second World War, he was very, very, it hurt him deeply when he heard about the destruction of European Jewry. Of course, his own Hungarian Jewry in 1944. But before that, he was made a Companion of Honor by the King in 1942. And in 1943, a special Festschrift, book of essays, honoring him, his 70th birthday in 1943, was brought out by distinguished scholars all over the Jewish world to show that they supported him in everything he did and that they wanted to honor him for his 70th birthday. But as I mentioned, the knowledge that people got of the extermination by the Nazis of European and Hungarian Jewry in 1944, even when the Nazis were losing the war, they still were carting off by train Hungarian Jewry to their death. It affected him very, very much. He gained a lot of support during the war years from his young son-in-law, Rabbi Dr. Solomon Schonfeld. Through the Chief Rabbi's Emergency Committee, Rabbi Schonfeld was among those who wanted to save young Jewish lives. There were Jewish children who were in non-Jewish homes, who were in monasteries and convents in Europe, and he did his best to save them and bring them back to their Jewish heritage. The chief rabbi lived on after the war till January 1946. He had an almost 33-year chief rabbinate. He did a lot for European and British Jewry, and he was devastated, as I mentioned, by what happened in Europe. And in January 1946, he passed away at the comparatively young age of 73. His levaya was universally mourned. His levaya was at Willesden Cemetery, where he's buried in the section devoted to previous chief rabbis. And his memory lives on through the Chumash. Mentioned you've got the Siddur here, through other publications, sermons, addresses, and studies which he brought out in his lifetime. And he, as I mentioned, he's still remembered. He's universally mourned. Yehi zichro baruch. May his memory be blessed always. Amen.
So observations, questions? Oh yes, Michael. Yeah.
Rabbi, everybody else is reverence.
The interesting thing is, after his chief rabbinate, that was the case. But when he became chief rabbi, he altered that. Even though he favored those who took semicha through what was then Jews College, but the fact that he called an assembly of Eastern European rabbis to assure them that they would have his assistance. There were those who got their rabbis elsewhere, who gradually were known as rabbi. He wasn't as insistent as the others. There would only be one rabbi in the country, as it were. He made a difference to it.
Thank you very much. That was really interesting. You always give us a good historic insight to a lot of personalities in
I also mentioned that during his chief rabbinate, there was a difference of opinion many times between himself and the president, that was Sir Robert Whaley Cohen. Many times they agreed, but there were other times when they didn't. And Hertz was a fierce defender of his chief rabbinate. He was a very strong personality. And if he disagreed with something that Sir Robert said, he didn't hesitate to say so. As I say, there were many times when they agreed, but there were times when they didn't, and he let his feelings be known. So he was a very strong advocate of traditional Judaism. Yes.
What was the relationship at that stage with the chief rabbi and the Beit Din? Who was the final arbiter on Jewish law at that stage? I mean, today the Beit Din sort of seem to be the bosses as such, but what was it like in those days?
As we know, the chief rabbi of the day is the Av Beit Din. He was whenever he felt something was important, he would strongly give his views. I don't know if it was through the chief rabbi or through others, but in 1935, Dan Abramsky became the Av Beit Din. But until he passed away, they had good relations. And of course, Dan Abramsky was one of those who spoke at the Levaya, together with others. And I think their relationship was a good one. Yes. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much again, Rabbi Vivian, for that. I will stop the record now and say goodbye to those on Zoom. See you all next week. And I'll do the bracha achrona for those